Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're venturing into one of the darkest chapters in British criminal history. A case that sent shockwaves through the nation and continues to haunt us decades later. We're talking about the Moor's murders, the harrowing crimes committed by Brady and Myra Hindley. This isn't just a recounting of events. It's an exploration of the chilling depths of human depravity. A journey into the twisted minds of two individuals who, together, orchestrated a series of acts so heinous they defy comprehension. We'll be navigating the bleak landscape of the Saddleworth Moor, a place forever stained by the horrors that unfolded there. We'll delve into the lives of Brady and Hindley, examining their backgrounds, their relationship, and the disturbing dynamic that fueled their reign of terror. Prepare to confront a story that is as disturbing as it is compelling, a story that raises difficult questions about the nature of evil, the power of manipulation, and the enduring search for justice in the face of unimaginable tragedy. This case is a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals. We will meticulously examine the evidence, the testimonies, and the chilling recordings that ultimately brought these two to justice. Join me as we unravel this complex and profoundly unsettling case, a case that will stay with you long after the video ends. A journey that will challenge your understanding of the human condition. Part 2. The Trail of Atrocity. The Moor's murders. Welcome back, everyone. We now delve into the heart of darkness. The chilling narrative of Brady and Myra Hindley, the perpetrators of the infamous Moor's murders. We've set the stage. Now, prepare yourselves as we walk the harrowing path of their reign of terror. A journey marked by unimaginable cruelty and the theft of innocent lives. To understand the gravity of their crimes, we must first paint a picture of the era. 1960s Britain was a society in transition. The post-war austerity was fading, replaced by a burgeoning youth culture, rock and roll, and a sense of newfound freedom. But beneath this veneer of progress, a darker undercurrent pulsed, a sinister reality that would soon be exposed by the horrors that unfolded on the desolate Saddleworth Moor. Our story truly begins with the meeting of two twisted souls. Brady, a brooding, self-proclaimed intellectual fascinated by Nazism, sadism, and the writings of the Marquis de Sade, and Myra Hindley, a young woman who would become utterly infatuated with Brady, drawn into his orbit like a moth to a deadly flame. Their relationship was no ordinary love story. It was a toxic cocktail of shared morbid fascination, a breeding ground for depravity. The descent into darkness and Brady, born Ian Duncan Stewart in Glasgow in 1938, had a troubled upbringing marked by neglect and a string of petty crimes. He was a loner, consumed by dark fantasies and a growing hatred for the world around him. Hindley, on the other hand, came from a seemingly ordinary working-class family. Yet, beneath her conventional exterior, she harbored a deep-seated insecurity and a yearning for acceptance, a vulnerability that Brady would expertly exploit. Their meeting in 1961, when they were both working at Millwards, a chemical distribution company in Manchester, was the catalyst for the horrors that were to follow. Brady saw in Hindley a willing accomplice, someone he could mold and manipulate to fulfill his darkest desires. Hindley, in turn, was captivated by Brady's intellect and his aura of danger. She became obsessed with him, willing to do anything to please him. Their relationship quickly escalated beyond mere infatuation. Brady introduced Hindley to his world of extremist literature, his fascination with violence and death. They immersed themselves in books and films that glorified brutality, their shared fantasies feeding off each other, growing ever more twisted and sinister. The first victim, Pauline Reed, the first innocent life to be snuffed out by this deadly do, was 16-year-old Pauline Reed. On July 12, 1963, Pauline, a neighbor of Hindley's sister, was on her way to a dance when she was lured into Hindley's car. It was a Friday evening, a night that should have been filled with the promise of youthful fun. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare. Hindley, using her seemingly harmless demeanor, offered Pauline a lift. Trusting and unsuspecting, Pauline accepted. What happened next is a testament to the chilling efficiency with which Brady and Hindley operated. They drove Pauline to a remote spot on Saddleworth Moor, a vast, desolate expanse of peat bogs and windswept hills. It was here, amidst the stark beauty of the natural landscape, that Pauline's young life was brutally extinguished. Brady, the dominant force in their partnership, took the lead in this first murder, though the exact details remain shrouded in the mists of time and the conflicting accounts given by the perpetrators themselves. What is known is that Pauline was sexually assaulted before her life was taken. Her body was then buried in a shallow grave, concealed beneath the peat, a secret the Moor would guard for decades. The disappearance of Pauline Reed sent shockwaves through the local community. A massive search was launched, but the vastness and unforgiving terrain of the moor made the task almost impossible. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the hope of finding Pauline alive slowly dwindled, replaced by a gnawing fear that something terrible had befallen her. The killing escalates Hugh, John Kilbride, emboldened by their first murder and the apparent ease with which they had gotten away with it. Brady and Hindley's bloodlust only intensified. They were now a twisted team, bound by their shared secret and their insatiable appetite for cruelty. Their next victim was 12-year-old John Kilbride. On November 23, 1963, John, a lively young boy who worked as a market trader, was abducted by Brady and Hindley in Ashton-under-Lyne. The method was chillingly similar to Pauline Reed's abduction. Hindley, playing the role of the friendly stranger, lured John into her car with the promise of helping her find a lost glove. Brady, lurking in the shadows, was the hidden menace, the predator waiting to strike. John was driven to the moor, the same desolate landscape that had become their macabre playground. There, he was subjected to unimaginable horrors, sexually assaulted and murdered. His body, like Pauline's, was buried in a shallow grave, another secret swallowed by the unforgiving Moor. The disappearance of John Kilbride added another layer of fear and anxiety to the already tense atmosphere in the region. The police were now dealing with two missing children, both vanished without a trace. The possibility of a serial killer operating in their midst began to dawn on the investigators, a terrifying prospect that sent shivers down the spines of the local community. A pattern emerges. Keith Bennett, a Brady and Hindley, however, were far from finished. Their thirst for violence seemed unquenchable. On June 16, 1964, they claimed their third victim, 12-year-old Keith Bennett. Keith, a bespectacled boy with a gentle nature, was on his way to his grandmother's house when he crossed paths with the deadly Dew. Hindley, once again, played the role of the innocent decoy. She approached Keith, asking for help in finding a lost glove, a ruse that had proven tragically effective in the past. Keith, unsuspecting and eager to help, agreed. He was led to a waiting car, where Brady was waiting. Keith was driven to Saddleworth Moor, the now familiar killing ground. He was sexually assaulted and murdered, his young life brutally cut short. His body was buried on the moor, but unlike the other victims, Keith's remains were never found, despite extensive searches over the years. This fact would later add another layer of torment to the already unbearable grief of his family, particularly his mother, Winnie Johnson, who dedicated her life to finding her son's remains, a quest that sadly remained unfulfilled until her death. The horror intensifies. Leslie Ann Downey, the abduction and murder of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey on Boxing Day, December 26, 1964, marked a horrifying escalation in Brady and Hindley's depravity. This time, they didn't just kill. They meticulously documented their cruelty, creating an audio recording of Leslie's torture, a chilling testament to their utter lack of remorse and their descent into the abyss of sadism. This act wasn't merely about taking a life. It was about savoring the power they held over their victim, relishing her terror and pain. Leslie, a young girl full of life and innocence, was lured away from a fairground near her home in Ancoats, Manchester. Hindley, as usual, played the role of the friendly stranger, enticing Leslie with the promise of sweets and a ride home. Once again, the trap was set, and another innocent child walked willingly into the clutches of evil. Leslie was taken to Hindley's grandmother's house, where Brady was waiting. What happened next is almost too horrific to describe. Leslie was subjected to prolonged torture, her screams and pleas for mercy captured on a 16-minute audio tape, a recording so disturbing that it would later be played in court, forever etching the horror of that night into minds of all who heard it. It's crucial to emphasize, to avoid sensationalizing, that the tape documented unimaginable suffering. It wasn't simply a record. It was an active component of their crime. The act of recording wasn't a dispassionate act of documentation. It was a means for Brady to relive and amplify the experience. This added layer of cruelty truly separated Brady and Hindley from other killers. Brady and Hindley didn't just want to kill, they wanted to dominate, to control, to inflict maximum suffering. The audio tape wasn't just evidence, it was a trophy, a testament to their power. The details on the tape are profoundly disturbing. We hear Leslie being forced to pose for obscene photographs, her terrified cries muffled by a scarf. We hear her begging for her mother, her voice filled with terror and pain. The tape is a chilling record of the unimaginable cruelty that humans are capable of inflicting on one another. After hours of torment, Leslie was finally strangled to death. Her body, like the others, was taken to Saddleworth Moor and buried in a shallow grave. This act, the disposal of a child's body on the desolate moor, had become a ritual for them, a final act of desecration. The final victim, Edward Evans, the final known victim of Brady and Hindley, was 17-year-old Edward Evans. Unlike their previous victims, Edward was older and physically stronger. His murder, which took place on October 6, 1965, was not a carefully planned abduction, but a brutal act of violence that ultimately led to the couple's downfall. Edward, who was homosexual, was lured to Hindley's grandmother's house by Brady, who had met him at a market in Manchester. This suggests a shift in their modus operandi, a departure from the younger victims they had previously targeted. Perhaps Brady felt a need to prove his dominance over a victim closer to his own age. Perhaps it was simply an opportunistic act. Once inside the house, a violent confrontation ensued. Brady attacked Edward with an axe, striking him repeatedly in a fit of rage. The noise of the struggle alerted David Smith, Hindley's brother-in-law, who was present in the house at the time. Smith, a troubled young man with a history of violence himself, initially participated in the attack, though he later claimed he was coerced by Brady. The murder of Edward Evans was a messy, brutal affair, a stark contrast to the calculated killings they had carried out on the moor. It was a crime of passion, fueled by rage and perhaps a hint of panic. The presence of David Smith, a witness to their depravity, was a crucial turning point, the loose thread that would unravel their carefully constructed web of evil. The unraveling begins. David Smith's testimony after witnessing the horrific murder of Edward Evans. David Smith was in a state of shock and terror. He had become an unwilling participant in a crime that went far beyond anything he could have imagined. Brady, attempting to control the situation, tried to enlist Smith's help in disposing of the body. He even tried to frame the murder as an act of self-defense, claiming that Edward had made unwanted sexual advances. Smith, however, was not entirely under Brady's control. He was horrified by what he had witnessed, and he knew that he had to do something. The next morning, he went to the police and told them everything he knew. This act of conscience, though motivated by fear and self-preservation, was the catalyst that finally brought Brady and Hindley's reign of terror to an end. The arrests and the discovery of the graves. Acting on Smith's information, the police quickly moved to arrest Brady and Hindley. They found Edward Evans's body wrapped in a plastic sheet in the bedroom of Hindley's grandmother's house. A gruesome confirmation of Smith's testimony. The house itself yielded a trove of incriminating evidence, including photographs of Leslie Ann Downey and the infamous audio tape of her torture. The discovery of the tape was a pivotal moment in the investigation. It provided irrefutable proof of Brady and Hindley's involvement in Leslie's murder and offered a chilling glimpse into the depths of their depravity. It was this tape, more than anything else, that solidified their image as monsters in the public consciousness. The police also found a notebook belonging to Brady, which contained a list of names, some of which matched the missing persons reports. This notebook, along with other evidence, led the police to Saddleworth Moor, the desolate landscape that held the dark secrets of Brady and Hindley's crimes. The subsequent searches of the moor were extensive and harrowing. The vastness of the terrain, coupled with the harsh weather conditions, made the task incredibly difficult. The police were aided by dogs trained to detect human remains. But the peat bogs and rugged hills were reluctant to give up their secrets. Eventually, the remains of Leslie Ann Downey and John Kilbride were found, buried in shallow graves, just as David Smith had described. The discovery of the bodies brought a sense of closure to the families of the victims, but it also confirmed the worst fears of the community. The idyllic landscape of the moor had been transformed into a symbol of horror, a graveyard for innocent children. The search for the other victims continued for years, fueled by the hope that their remains might be found and returned to their families for a proper burial. Pauline Ried's body was finally discovered in 1987, after a renewed search prompted by Brady's confession to her murder. However, the body of Keith Bennett remains undiscovered to this day, a painful reminder of the lasting impact of Brady and Hindley's crimes. The trial and the public outcry, the trial of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in 1966, was one of the most sensational and disturbing in British history. The details of their crimes, particularly the torture and murder of Leslie Ann Downey, shocked the nation. The public was horrified by the cold, blooded nature of the killings and the utter lack of remorse shown by the perpetrators. The courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and the families of the victims, all eager to witness justice being served. The atmosphere was tense and emotionally charged as the gruesome details of the crimes were laid bare. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against Brady and Hindley, including the audio tape of Leslie Ann Downey's torture, the photographs found at Hindley's grandmother's house, and the testimony of David Smith. The defense, on the other hand, struggled to mount a convincing case in the face of such overwhelming evidence. Brady, ever the arrogant and manipulative figure, attempted to portray himself as an intellectual, a victim of circumstance. He claimed that he was not responsible for the murders, that Hindley was the dominant force in their relationship. Hindley, for her part, tried to portray herself as a victim of Brady's influence, a naive young woman who had been led astray by a charismatic and dangerous man. The jury, however, was not swayed by their attempts to deflect blame. After a trial lasting just over 2 weeks, they found both Brady and Hindley guilty of murder. Brady was convicted of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey, Edward Evans, and John Kilbride. Hindley was convicted of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans, and for shielding Brady. After the murder of John Bride, they were both sentenced to life imprisonment. The Moor's murders left an indelible scar on the British psyche. The names Ian Brady and Myra Hindley became synonymous with evil, their crimes a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart. In our next segment, we'll explore the painstaking investigation that brought these two to justice, and then delve into the complex psychological profiles of these notorious killers. Stay with us. Part 3: The Pursuit of Justice, the Investigation and Capture of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Welcome back. We've witnessed the horrific crimes committed by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Now, we shift our focus to the dedicated individuals who worked tirelessly to bring them to justice, the investigators who pieced together the fragments of evidence, navigated a labyrinth of deception, and ultimately unmasked the monsters behind the Moor's murders. This is the story of the pursuit, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable evil. The initial disappearance Sessage, a community gripped by fear. The investigation into the Moor's murders didn't begin as a unified effort to catch a serial killer due. It started with individual missing person reports, each a separate thread of tragedy that would eventually be woven together into a tapestry of horror. The disappearances, beginning with Pauline Reed in July 1963, were initially treated as isolated incidents. However, as the number of missing children grew, a chilling pattern began to emerge, casting a long, dark shadow over the communities surrounding Saddleworth Moor. Each disappearance followed a similar pattern. A young person vanished without a trace, often after last being seen in a public place. The local police, initially dealing with what they believed were runaway cases, were faced with a growing sense of unease. The families of the missing children, however, knew in their hearts that something far more sinister was at play. They pleaded with the police to take their concerns seriously, to connect the dots between the disappearances. The disappearances of John Kilbride in November 1963 and Keith Bennett in June 1964 intensified the public's fear and put immense pressure on the police to find answers. The local communities were gripped by anxiety. Parents were afraid to let their children out of their sight, and the once familiar landscape of Saddleworth Moor had become a place of dread. The investigation gains momentum, connecting the dots. As the number of missing children increased, the investigation gradually gained momentum. Detectives from different divisions began to share information, comparing notes on the various cases. They started to see the similarities, the chilling parallels between the disappearances. The possibility that they were dealing with a serial killer, or perhaps even a pair of killers, began to take root. The police faced numerous challenges in the early stages of the investigation. The vastness and rugged terrain of Saddleworth Moor made searching for clues or remains incredibly difficult. The lack of forensic technology available at the time also hampered their efforts. DNA analysis, which would later play a crucial role in solving cold cases, was not yet a tool in the police arsenal. Despite these challenges, the detectives were relentless in their pursuit of the truth. They interviewed countless witnesses, followed up on every lead, no matter how tenuous, and painstakingly pieced together the fragments of information they had. They were driven by a sense of duty, a determination to bring justice to the victims and their families, and to put an end to the reign of terror that had gripped the region. The breakthrough, David Smith's testimony. The turning point in the investigation came, as we know, with the murder of Edward Evans on October 6, 1965. This brutal act, witnessed by Myra Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith, provided the crucial breakthrough that the police had been waiting for. Smith's decision to go to the police, despite his initial involvement and fear, was the catalyst that finally brought Brady and Hindley's crimes to light. Smith's testimony was a harrowing account of the events that had transpired at Hindley's grandmother's house. He described in detail the brutal attack on Edward Evans, the involvement of both Brady and Hindley, and the subsequent attempt to dispose of the body. His words painted a chilling picture of the couple's depravity and utter disregard for human life. The arrests, a house of horrors, armed with Smith's detailed statement. The police moved swiftly to arrest Ian, Brady, and Myra Hindley. The scene that greeted them at Hindley's grandmother's house was like something out of a horror film. The body of Edward Evans, wrapped in plastic sheeting, was found in an upstairs bedroom, a gruesome confirmation of Smith's testimony. The subsequent search of the house yielded a trove of incriminating evidence. Photographs, later revealed to depict a terrified and abused Leslie and Downey, were discovered, providing a visual testament to the couple's cruelty. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was the audio tape, a 16-minute recording of Leslie's torture. This chilling recording not only confirmed their involvement in her murder, but also revealed the depths of their sadism. The discovery of the tape was a watershed moment in the investigation. It left no doubt about the guilt of Brady and Hindley and provided a horrifying glimpse into the minds of the killers. The tape was so disturbing that it was played in court during the trial, a decision that was both controversial and necessary to convey the full extent of their crimes. The search on the moor. Unearthing the graves, the evidence found at Hindley's grandmother's house, along with information extracted from Brady's notebooks, that pointed to Saddleworth Moor as the burial site for their victims. The police launched a massive search operation, a painstaking process that would involve hundreds of officers, specialized search teams, and sniffer dogs trained to detect human remains. The search was a race against time and the elements. The vast, desolate landscape of the moor, with its peat bogs, hidden gullies, and unpredictable weather, presented a formidable challenge. The police were determined to find the bodies of the victims, to bring them home to their families, and to provide concrete evidence to support the charges against Brady and Hindley. The discovery of Leslie Ann Downey's body, buried in a shallow grave near Holland, Brown Knoll, was a moment of both relief and profound sadness. It confirmed the worst fears of her family and provided tangible proof of the couple's horrific crimes. The subsequent discovery of John Kilbride's remains further solidified the case against them and added another layer of tragedy to the already heartbreaking story. The investigation continues. The search for Keith Bennett, despite the discovery of two bodies. The search for Keith Bennett, the 12-year-old boy who had vanished in June 1964, continued for years. His disappearance had haunted the community, and the police were determined to find him, to bring closure to his family, particularly his mother, Winnie Johnson, who tirelessly campaigned for the search to continue. Brady, in a cruel twist, later confessed to Keith's murder, but refused to reveal the location of his body. He claimed to have forgotten the exact spot, a claim that many believed was a deliberate attempt to maintain control and inflict further pain on the victims' families. This added another dimension to his already monstrous persona, showcasing a complete lack of empathy. The psychological manipulation extended beyond his initial crimes, becoming a tool of continued torment. The search for Keith's remains involved numerous excavations on the moor, based on various leads and theories. Despite the extensive efforts, his body was never found, a fact that added another layer of tragedy to the already devastating story. The failure to find Keith became a symbol of the enduring pain caused by Brady and Hindley, a wound that refused to heal. The role of forensics. A limited arsenal. It's important to remember that the investigation into the Moor's murders took place in the 1960s, a time when forensic science was still in its infancy. The police did not have access to the sophisticated tools and techniques that are available to law enforcement today. DNA analysis, for example, was not yet a possibility. Despite these limitations, the investigators made the most of the forensic evidence they could gather. Fingerprints, bloodstains, and fibers were collected and analyzed, providing crucial links between Brady and Hindley and the crime scenes. The photographs found at Hindley's grandmother's house were also analyzed, providing further evidence of their involvement in Leslie Ann Downey's murder. The audio tape, however, remained the most powerful piece of forensic evidence. It provided a direct link to the killers and offered a chilling account of their actions. The tape was not just evidence, it was a window into the minds of the perpetrators, a testament to their cruelty and their utter disregard for human life. The public's Rolia nation, united in horror. The Moor's murders captured the attention of the entire nation. The media coverage was intense, and the public followed every development in the case with a mixture of horror and fascination. The details of the crimes, particularly the torture and murder of Leslie Ann Downey, were deeply disturbing, and the public outcry was immense. The public's reaction to the case was not just about the gruesome nature of the crimes. It was also about the victims. They were innocent children, their lives brutally cut short by two individuals who seemed to embody pure evil. The public's sympathy for the victims and their families was overwhelming, and there was a collective demand for justice to be served. The case also sparked a wider debate about the nature of evil, the causes of violence, and the effectiveness of the justice system. People struggled to comprehend how two seemingly ordinary individuals could commit such horrific acts. The case raised questions about the role of upbringing, mental health, and societal factors in shaping criminal behavior. The Trial A Nation watches the trial of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in 1966 was a media sensation. The courtroom was packed each day with reporters, spectators, and the families of the victims. The nation watched as the details of the crimes were laid bare, and the evidence against the killers was presented. The trial was a harrowing experience for everyone involved, particularly for the families of the victims. They had to relive the horrors of their loved ones' deaths, to hear the gruesome details of their final moments. The audio tape of Leslie and Downey's torture was played in court, a moment that many found unbearable. The trial was not just about establishing the guilt of Brady and Hindley. It was also about understanding their motives, about trying to make sense of the senseless. The prosecution presented a compelling case, arguing that Brady was the mastermind behind the killings, a manipulative and sadistic individual who had corrupted Hindley and drawn her into his web of evil. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Hindley was a victim of Brady's influence, a young woman who had fallen under his spell and had been coerced into participating in the crimes. They portrayed her as a naive and vulnerable individual who had been manipulated by a dangerous and controlling man. The verdict justice served after a trial lasting just over 2 weeks. The jury returned their verdict. Ian Brady was found guilty of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey, Edward Evans, and John Kilbride. Myra Hindley was found guilty of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans, and for shielding Brady after the murder of John Kilbride. They were both sentenced to life imprisonment. The verdict was met with a sense of relief and a collective sigh of satisfaction from the public. Justice had been served, and 2 of the most notorious killers in British history had been held accountable for their crimes. The families of the victims, though still grappling with their immense loss, could finally begin to find some sense of closure. The pursuit of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley was a long and arduous journey, a testament to the dedication and perseverance of law enforcement. The investigation was a complex puzzle, with each piece of evidence carefully examined and connected to form a complete picture of the horrors that had taken place. In our next segment, we will delve into the psychological profiles of Brady and Hindley, attempting to understand the minds of these individuals who committed such unspeakable acts. We will explore the factors that contributed to their descent into darkness and the enduring questions that remain about the nature of evil itself. Stay with us. Part 4. The Psychology of Evil, Deconstructing Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Welcome back. We've chronicled the crimes and the investigation, but now we turn to the most perplexing question of all. Why? What drove Ian Brady and Myra Hindley to commit such unspeakable acts? In this segment, we delve into the dark recesses of their minds, exploring their individual personalities, the toxic dynamic of their relationship, and the possible factors that contributed to their transformation into 2 of Britain's most notorious killers. This is a journey into the psychology of evil, an attempt to understand the unfathomable. Ian Brady, the architect of evil, Ian Brady. often considered the driving force behind the Moor's murders, was a complex and deeply disturbed individual. His personality was a chilling tapestry woven with threads of narcissism, sadism, and a profound hatred for the world around him. To understand Brady, we must first examine his early life, a breeding ground for the darkness that would later consume him. Born Ian Duncan Stewart in Glasgow in 1938, Brady had a troubled childhood marked by neglect and instability. He never knew his father, and his mother, a struggling waitress, placed him in foster care when he was just a few months old. He was later adopted, but his early experiences of abandonment and rejection likely left deep emotional scars, fostering a sense of resentment and a deep-seated insecurity. Brady's formative years were characterized by a pattern of antisocial behavior. He was a loner, withdrawn and isolated, with a penchant for cruelty to animals. He was expelled from school for disruptive behavior and had several run-ins with the law for petty theft. These early experiences suggest a developing personality disorder, a disregard for rules and social norms, and a growing fascination with violence. As he grew older, Brady developed an obsessive interest in Nazism, sadomasochism, and the writings of the Marquis de Sade. He immersed himself in literature that glorified violence, power, and control, feeding his dark fantasies and further distorting his already warped worldview. He saw himself as superior to others, an intellectual and an outsider, and he developed a deep contempt for what he perceived as the weaknesses and hypocrisy of society. Psychopathy and sadistic personality disorder. Understanding Brady's mind. Many experts who have studied Brady's case believe he exhibited traits consistent with psychopathy, a personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, remorse, and guilt, coupled with a manipulative and deceitful nature. Psychopaths often have a superficial charm that they use to exploit others, and they are prone to impulsive and reckless behavior. Brady's meticulous planning of the murders, his cold-blooded execution of his victims, and his complete lack of remorse all point towards psychopathic tendencies. He saw his victims not as human beings, but as objects to be used and discarded, a clear indication of his profound lack of empathy. Furthermore, Brady's enjoyment of inflicting pain and suffering on his victims suggests a diagnosis of sadistic personality disorder. Sadists derive pleasure from the physical or psychological suffering of others. The audio recording of Leslie and Downey's torture, a chilling testament to Brady's cruelty, provides strong evidence of his sadistic nature. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to inflict maximum pain and terror to savor the power he held over his victims. The role of fantasy and control. Brady's inner world, Brady's crimes, were not simply impulsive acts of violence. They were the culmination of years of dark fantasies and a deep-seated need for control. He meticulously planned the abductions and murders, choosing his victims carefully and disposing of their bodies in a way that he believed would ensure they would never be found. His fascination with Nazism and the Marquis de Sade played a significant role in shaping his fantasies. He saw himself as a superior being entitled to exert his will over others. The murders were, in a sense, an attempt to act out these fantasies, to create a world in which he was the ultimate authority, the master of life and death. The act of burying the bodies on Saddleworth Moor was also symbolic. The vast, desolate landscape became an extension of Brady's inner world, a place where he could exercise his control and keep his dark secrets hidden from the world. The moor became his kingdom, a place where he could reign supreme, free from the constraints of society. Myra Hindley, the follower, the enabler, the monster. Myra Hindley's role in the Moor's murders is perhaps even more perplexing than Brady's. How could a seemingly ordinary young woman become entangled in such horrific crimes? What was it about her personality that made her susceptible to Brady's influence? Hindley, born in 1942, came from a working-class family in Manchester. Unlike Brady, she did not have a history of significant childhood trauma or neglect. However, she was described as a shy and insecure young woman, someone who was eager to please and desperate for acceptance. These traits, coupled with a certain naivety and a tendency towards hero worship, made her vulnerable to Brady's manipulative charm. When Hindley met Brady in 1961, she was immediately captivated by him. He was intelligent, articulate, and different from anyone she had ever met. He introduced her to a world of books, ideas, and dark fantasies that both fascinated and disturbed her. She became obsessed with him, willing to do anything to win his approval. The dynamics of a toxic relationshiping. Brady's control over Hindley. The relationship between Brady and Hindley was a toxic mix of dominance and submission, control and dependence. Brady, the dominant partner, expertly manipulated Hindley, exploiting her insecurities and her desire to please him. He gradually drew her into his world of violence and depravity, feeding her his twisted ideologies and encouraging her participation in his crimes. Hindley, in turn, became increasingly dependent on Brady. She saw him as her mentor, her lover, her guide to a world beyond the mundane. She adopted his beliefs, his values, and his hatred for society. She became his willing accomplice, participating in the abductions and even, in some cases, the murders themselves. The debating was Hindley a victim or a monster? The question of Hindley's culpability has been debated for decades. Was she a victim of Brady's manipulative influence? A naive young woman who was led astray by a dangerous man? Or was she a willing participant, a monster in her own right, who derived pleasure from the suffering of others? Some argue that Hindley was a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. a psychological condition in which hostages develop positive feelings towards their captors. They point to her apparent devotion to Brady, her willingness to do anything for him, and her later claims that she was afraid of him. Others, however, believe that Hindley was a far more active and willing participant in the crimes than she later admitted. They point to her role in luring the victims, her presence during the murders, and her participation in the disposal of the bodies. They argue that she was not simply a passive follower, but a key player in the horrific events that unfolded on Saddleworth Moor. The role of shared psychopathy, or foggy decks. One theory that attempts to explain the dynamic between Brady and Hindley is the concept of foggy decks, or shared psychosis. This is a rare psychiatric syndrome in which delusional beliefs and sometimes hallucinations are transmitted from one individual to another. In the case of Brady and Hindley, it's possible that Brady, the dominant and more disturbed individual, projected his delusional worldview onto Hindley, who, due to her own insecurities and dependence on him, gradually adopted these beliefs as her own. This shared psychosis could explain how Hindley became so deeply involved in the crimes, how she could participate in acts of such extreme cruelty. It's also possible that Hindley exhibited traits of dependent personality disorder, a condition characterized by an excessive need to be taken care of, a fear of separation, and a submissive and clinging behavior. This would make her particularly susceptible to the influence of a dominant and manipulative individual like Brady. The unanswerable questions nature vs. nurture. The case of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley raises profound questions about the nature of evil, the origins of criminal behavior, and the interplay between nature and nurture. Were they born with a predisposition towards violence, or were they shaped by their experiences, their environment, and their relationship with each other? It's likely that a combination of factors contributed to their descent into darkness. Brady's troubled childhood, his early exposure to violence, and his developing personality disorders likely played a significant role. Hindley's insecurities, her need for acceptance, and her susceptibility to manipulation made her vulnerable to Brady's influence. Their relationship, a toxic mix of dominance, submission, and shared psychosis, provided the catalyst that transformed their individual pathologies into a shared nightmare of violence and depravity. The murders were not simply the acts of two individuals. They were the product of a twisted partnership, a symbiotic relationship in which each fed off the other's darkness. The enduring legacy, a study in evil. The Moor's murders remain a chilling case study in the psychology of evil. The case continues to fascinate and horrify us, prompting us to question the very nature of humanity. Brady and Hindley became symbols of depravity, their names forever etched in the annals of criminal history. Their actions serve as a stark reminder of the capacity for darkness that resides within us all, and the importance of understanding the complex interplay of factors that can lead individuals down a path of unimaginable cruelty. The psychological analysis of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley offers no easy answers, no simple explanations for their horrific crimes. Their story is a complex tapestry woven with threads of nature and nurture, individual pathology, and toxic relationships. In our final segment, we'll reflect on the lasting impact of the murders, the lessons learned, and the importance of remembering the victims. We'll also offer some final thoughts on the enduring questions that this case raises about the human condition. Stay with us. Part 5, Reflections and a Call to Action. The Moor's murders remain a dark stain on British history, a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. The names Ian Brady and Myra Hindley have become synonymous with evil, their crimes casting a long shadow over the decades. But amidst the darkness, it's crucial to remember the victims. Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Their lives were tragically cut short, their potential unfulfilled. They must never be forgotten. We must also acknowledge the tireless efforts of law enforcement, the unwavering support of the community, and the resilience of those affected by these events. Their dedication serves as a beacon of hope in the face of unimaginable darkness. This case compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about the human condition, the capacity for both good and evil that resides within each of us. It forces us to examine the societal factors that can contribute to such atrocities and to remain vigilant against the forces of hatred and intolerance. The pursuit of understanding, though often painful, is vital to preventing future tragedies. Let the legacy of the Moor's murders not just be one of horror, but also a catalyst for positive change. Let us strive to create a society where children are safe, where mental health is prioritized, and where the vulnerable are protected. Let us honor the memory of the victims by working towards a future where such darkness can never again take hold. Let us learn from the past so that we may build a brighter future. Thank you for joining me on this difficult but important journey. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more explorations into true crime and the complexities of the human psyche. Your support allows me to continue shedding light on these critical stories. Until next time, stay safe and take care.